Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here. Let's talk about Myth Janor. And apparently that is how you guys think it should be said. You all were very clear on this. But let's talk about the expansion. So it's not out yet. What things do I want to see? What things do I think should be in there, regardless of my own opinions, for this to be a success? What are some of my gripes with DDO's content as of late? As of the past few years that I want to see changed. That's the kind of stuff I want to get into. So let's talk about the quest. So this the quest first, but the expansion itself has 13 quests, 1 wilderness, 1 raid. We know that that's out. So what do we need to see from these quests? What issues did the last expansion, Vecna Unleashed, have that I want to see change? So Vecna, let's talk about Vecna, because I know I didn't do a formal review of it like I normally do. I did do a quick one, but in any case, Vecna. I think a lot of the player base agrees that it feels like a little bit of a slog, particularly in the second half. And I think that's the biggest downside of the expansion. The quests do feel long, and it's not just because of the length of the quest, because I have nothing against long quests. It's more that the expansion itself did not have enough variance in the types of things you did. Not a lot of gameplay variants, not a lot of quest variants in the design. It was mostly go through these maps, some really well built, some not as well built, but you go through the maps, engage in a story, but basically the gameplay came down to a lot of just slaying dungeons that were somewhat linear, fairly linear. I mean, there certainly were ones that weren't as linear, like Grand Theft Auto, but it was a lot of stuff we've seen before, whether that was puzzles that were basically just puzzles we'd seen before. There were no new puzzles in Vecna Unleashed, for example. Unless you want to argue that a minor variation of an old puzzle was a new puzzle, I wouldn't say that. But I think that's really the problem that really what it came down to with Vecna is that was the problem. It felt like a slog. It was too much repetition. So what I want to see, first of all, when it comes to the quest, and I'll get into the raid, wilderness area, and other loot and other things later, but the first thing I want to see, the most obvious thing, is more varying types of quests in terms of game design that differ from that normal formula. And we definitely need new mechanics that we haven't seen before, or that we've rarely seen. New puzzles, like brand new puzzles, and encounters that make us play the game differently. So I guess first when we get into puzzles, I want to see in Myth Draenor at minimum 1 brand new puzzle type. So not a rehashed version of a previous puzzle, not a minor alteration of a previous puzzle, but something that's actually from the ground up completely different. There's so many, and I've talked about this a bit before in videos, but this is like a big stickler for me because so often in DDO, we see puzzles repeated and rehashed over and over and over and over again. The biggest one being tile puzzles. I like tile puzzles. You like tile puzzles. They're great. But we've had them since Korthos. We've had them for what, 13 years? I don't know how many years tile puzzles been in the game, but they're just way overused. We need more new things. So a lot of ideas. How about something like a simple card puzzle? I don't know, something like Final Fantasy VIII Triple Triad comes to mind. Some simple puzzle game. Maybe you can even play it inside the UI window. That would be awesome. Something like that. Maybe just other things they could do. A sliding picture puzzle. We see that's a common puzzle type we don't see. Other things they could do is when it comes to puzzles, and I don't know if this would really be a puzzle. I mean, I want to see brand new puzzles, but on top of that, they could bring back puzzle types we don't see very often, or puzzle type mechanic. I don't know if you consider red light, green light in Deathworm a puzzle mechanic. That's one mechanic I've always noticed that they've only used once and they've never used anywhere else. So that would be cool if that made a return in part of a quest. Another one that's maybe they want to leave it as exclusive to that one quest, but the Mastermind puzzle in Reaver's Fate, I always thought that was a puzzle that's made for a quest and not a raid. In Reaver's Fate, you can't actually do that puzzle as it's intended because you don't have time. You only have 20 minutes in that raid to do it, or everyone dies. So you're kind of forced to use the solver. You can't actually think your way through it and deduce your way through that puzzle. So I always thought that would be a good idea to put that type of puzzle into an actual quest so you can actually think through it and take your time with it. They can make it an optional, kind of like how the big Q puzzle in Ghost of a Chance is an optional. Just put it into an optional room, let people who want to engage in it do it. That would be fun. We need, for sure, moving on from puzzles, dungeons that play differently. And this is a huge one because this has long been my biggest criticism with DDO's dungeon design, really ever since Saltmarsh, is we've kind of seen this with the vast majority of dungeons, a very similar design in terms of the actual pathing, and that we have a fairly linear dungeon, and the optionals tend to be, kind of rehashed, where it's either a hidden door with a chest in it with traps or not traps, or a separate room where you open it and there's a mini boss and you get a chest or don't get a chest. You don't see a lot of variances when it comes to the optionals, but anyways, I want to see at least 3 of the 13 quests in Mithranor differ in terms of gameplay and get away from that kind of repetitive quest design. So things that they've done that have recently that have been a huge hit, I think Pilgrim's Peril, the whole community agreed. The mechanics in that quest when they introduced it recently were amazing. So what that quest, if you all haven't played that quest, what that quest does is essentially it makes you care about kill order. It makes you use your brain. You're not actually doing what you do a lot in DDO, which is enter dungeon, AoE DPS everything, move on to, or step into room, AoE DPS everything, move on to next room. You actually have to think about kill order because you have certain NPCs that grant, say, shields that provide massive DR to certain mobs. You have certain mobs that raise or that are healers, or they may raise other mobs from the dead. Things like that. Like, that was a great mechanic that I want to see return. I want to see more things like that make us care about kill order. Next, a dungeon with these are just other ideas of things they could do in terms of mixing up the gameplay a bit. Like a dungeon, and this is one that probably a lot of you won't like, but I think it would be cool. A dungeon where you're in sword sleds from the very beginning, that kind of plays like a shoot 'em up, like think of like NES games like Xevious or 1942. I could imagine you getting on your sword sled at the beginning of the quest and just going straight to the end. I think that would be awesome. Maybe make it a side quest or something for people who don't want to play, but I think that would be cool. A puzzle focused dungeon, getting back to puzzles now, I think would be cool. They've done some of this, like housekeeping, that quest, which is in the hut in the harbor, but or they could do it in the reign of like Prey on the Hunter, which is a quest I really like at the beginning. Now it has problems at the end, but I really like the randomized maze portion in that quest, where you run into a room and it is an actual maze, and it's a randomized each time you go in there, so you don't get the same one every time. I think that would be awesome. I'd love to see a room where you enter and it's a random puzzle. Could be one of, I don't know, 10, 15 different layouts that you actually have to think your way through every time. I think one type of quest we don't see a lot is, and some of you also don't like this, but a lot of people do. You take a very polarizing quest, like Spies in the House. They don't make quests like that anymore. I would love to see a quest like Spies in the House. Personally, it's very polarizing. Some of y'all hate it, but personally, it's one of my favorite quests in DDO is Spies in the House. It does platforming well to where you don't, has a platforming element, but it also rewards knowing little things about it, and it's really rewarding. Once you know how to run that quest, it's quite rewarding, and I enjoy kind of climbing up to the top. So I think there's other quests like, say, like Coalescence Chamber. Maybe they didn't do this as well, but I think Spies in the House does it really well. So a quest like that, I think, would be cool. Some kind of like platforming, like make some. And I also don't want to see them shy away from platforming, because we basically don't get platforming in dungeons anymore. I know lag's a thing, guys, but it's okay if you fall due to lag. It happens every once in a while. It doesn't happen that often. Occasionally it'll happen, but I would love to see an optional, and I've mentioned this before, but an optional in a quest that gives a really tough platforming challenge, like we've seen in the Snow Peaks event, in the Snow Peaks climb. I would love to see something like that in an optional in a quest. I'm definitely, if you're going to go that far with it, definitely don't require it, but you could throw it in there as an optional, and people who don't want to do it don't have to do it. Some other ideas I would love to see them do in content: a big underwater maze. We don't really have a lot of underwater sections, and I'm not counting quests like, say, the one in the swamp in Feywild where you're underwater but battling. That's not what I mean. I mean actual underwater swim. We don't really see a lot of big underwater maze or swims, and that's something they could definitely do. Like make a quest where a large portion of it is like an underwater like maze of some type. I think that would be cool. Now, certainly a lot of people, I know some of y'all are groaning right now. I can hear you from the future, but I would love to see them do that. I would love to see a quest that emphasizes speed and party coordination. Maybe you make a slowly building damage over time effect on you, so that it kind of forces you, put some pressure on you to go fast through the dungeon. Maybe make it so it can be dispelled in certain points. I mean, these are just some ideas. Another mystery dungeon would be cool, kind of like they did once with I Know Who Done It. Another quest like that. And the important thing is, guys, I know some of y'all hear some of these ideas and you're like, oh, I don't want that. And I know there's a segment of the community that really wants really all they care about is character progression, and they would be just as happy going down a straight line and looting a chest if it was the best XP per minute. But but I want to emphasize these ideas. It's not like this should be every quest, okay? Just some quests. It's important that these things that really vary from the core gameplay of DDO, they shouldn't be overused, but they do need to be thrown in some in content so that it feels fresh, right? It makes those more standard dungeons feel not that makes you avoid the problem like Vecna Unleashed had, where it starts to feel like a slog because you don't have enough things in the quest design that are mixing up the gameplay from that core kind of hack and slash gameplay you get in DDO. So just keep that in mind. But I think it's really important that some of these quests, maybe two or three of the quests, I would love to see have some game-changing element like that really changes up the gameplay, so that when you're going through and running the saga, maybe every third or fourth quest plays very differently than the ones before it. A couple things I want to add on here is wild magic is obviously the biggest way they could do this, right? They could definitely achieve something here, depending on how they apply it and how quickly the wild magic happens, and how big of a deal the effects are. We have a lot of this information already out, and my experience so far in playing from Lamania Preview 1 is that they're going to make wild magic areas basically completely optional, and this is in line with what developers have already said, and I'm actually not sure that's the right choice. I actually think it's okay, and I hope that while I think it's okay to make it optional a lot of the time, I certainly hope there's sections of Myth Draenor where you're forced to deal with the wild magic, like maybe there's an in-boss fight and you have to be in the wild magic area. I certainly hope there's some of that. And it's not like the wild magic is so game-changing that the RNG is going to make you fail or not fail a dungeon, but I do want to see some of that in there to at least, throw in something different, mix up the gameplay. And I know that they have some lore constraints with Myth Draenor, so they may not be as flexible, but I'm pretty sure they have some flexibility at least when it comes to side quests in what they design here and in the gameplay. So I hope they mix things up. That's really the biggest thing I want to see from the expansion, other than the raid, which we'll get to in a minute. And another thing I want to emphasize with these kind of dungeons that play differently, you're not going to like every one of them, and that's okay. I would much rather the developers take chances in their content and give me a variety of quests. And I would much rather say out of the 13 quests, I'd much rather really like 5 of them, really hate 2 of them, and feel okay about the rest than have 13 quests that I feel samey about the whole thing, right? I would rather hate some quests than every quest just feel the same. So that's the thing I want to get away from. I hope the devs get away from is, and I don't know this for a fact, speculation obviously, but I get the feeling from listening to developers talk about things and read their comments on the forums that they are trying to make everyone happy all the time. And I hope that's not, and maybe it's not, and I hope that's not the mindset they have, because what it does is that will prevent them from taking chances and being creative. And it will, because if you have to make everyone happy all the time, then you can't put any exciting new potentially controversial mechanics in your quest. Everything kind of has to stick to the standard DDO formula of go down dungeon, kill mobs in a room, have an infight, have some optionals that may have a mini boss or chests in them, and you really can't do anything crazy different. And sometimes these things fail with the player base. Like I think a lot of the player base doesn't like the capstone to the Epic Three Ball Cove saga, because while I think personally the idea of using like these ballistas to shoot an enemy ship was a great idea in theory, and maybe it didn't pan out too well when they actually designed it. But I would much rather them take some chances and maybe fail a little bit than every quest just feel the same. So devs, take chances, please. I know it's late into the dev cycle at this point, so maybe if you can't apply this to Myth Draenor, maybe apply it to future content. But that's how I feel about it. So yeah, quests. So with quests, that's the main thing I want to see. Let's go into the raid now. The raid. So perhaps my biggest disappointment when it comes to DDO as of late, in really the past several years, is their extremely low level of production of new raids. I know some of you don't care about raids, but personally, as someone who raids all the time, and for anyone who doesn't know, I lead raids every Saturday at 3 p.m. on Silliness. If you're ever interested, go to my link tree below. You can sign up. I have a raid sign up that goes up every Monday morning on my Discord, so go check that out if you're interested. But personally, as an avid raider, I really care about having new raids, and I'm really sick of the current raids. I'm just getting really burnt out on them. So we need to see a bigger production of raids. So In the past 2 years, let's look at what we've gotten over the past 2 years. Okay. In the past 2 years, we've gotten Legendary Chronoscope, which wasn't a new raid because that was just an upscaled rehash of a 14-year-old raid with minimal changes. So we've really only gotten 2 new raids, Moorgrave and Skeletons. One of these 2 I wouldn't really consider a full raid because it doesn't have any more than 1 phase. But let's get into Skeletons first, because Skeletons came out in July 20th, 2022, and I think it's a fantastic raid. The developers did a great job. For me, it's probably a top 3 all-time raid in DDO. Fantastic. Now, Moorgrave came out September 13th, 2023, and as mentioned, it's not a full raid as I'd define it. They kind of give us just the boss phase of the raid. The Myth-Draenor raid, to be a full raid, should have 2 to 3 preceding interesting phases before the boss fight. And a raid like Moorgrave, basically, they just cut making any other phases but the boss fight. So what we really need from Myth-Draenor is a full raid, like something along the lines of scale of, say, like the Curse of Strahd or Skeletons of the Closet, where you have multiple phases in an in-fight. It's really important because we haven't gotten a full raid since Skeletons in the Closet. And I'm also starting to worry a little bit about the situation when it comes to the in-game raiding scene if we don't get more raids. Because as the level cap goes up and we start to see regular loot that's minimum level 34, that's going to perhaps be better than most of the current raid loot that's out there, since the raids are a lower level. And I worry about there being a lack of fresh raids that are actually have compelling loot that people want to go after. So as a result, people aren't going to be nearly as incentivized to raid, and that could hurt the raiding end scene, which is a really important part of DDO. Maybe I know not everyone's into it, but it is a really important part of DDO and the core of DDO's end game. So the raid production has to go up. I know it's only 1 raid, and we know we're only getting 1 raid this year. So a lot of these comments really go towards 2025, 2026. But if you look at the past few years, we've gotten 1 new raid each of the past 3 years. We're only getting 1 this year, 1 in 2023, 1 in 2022. Again, referring to actual new raids, not rehashes. Yeah, we just we need more. And actually, I think in 2022, we did get Hunter be Hunted before the expansion, so I'll correct myself there. It's actually been 2 in 2022. But since Skeletons, we've only gotten the 2. So what I want to see from Myth-Draenor, we know it's 1 raid. I was hoping it's 2, but it's probably going to be 1 raid. It needs to be a full raid. If it's a raid like Fire of Moorgrave, that's just the boss fight, that's a shortened kind of shortcut raid, it's going to be a disappointment. This is a full expansion. We should get a full raid. Let's move on to the Wilderness. So Wilderness is one thing that they've improved. SSG has improved vastly on. I think the Isle of Dread Wilderness area is about perfect and probably the best wilderness area they've ever done. I'm not necessarily mean that in terms of the scenery. I certainly think something like Ravenloft's wilderness area is prettier in terms of like aesthetic design, but in terms of mechanics, I think the Isle of Dreads is the best. And in terms of making a compromise between convenience and immersion, I think it's definitely like perfect, basically designed, because they gave us teleporter points in the wilderness area, but they didn't do Ravenloft style straight up to the quest, and they also didn't do like requiring you to make these long runs like you do in the Sands, for example. So I think it's a perfect compromise between immersion and convenience, kind of giving you these points within the wilderness area, but you're still getting that experience of running up to the quest, because what you lose, and I think it's important, I think it's such a shame, and I know several mentioned this, I think it's such a shame that Ravenloft has teleporter points right to the quest, and I know there's a segment of the player base that always wants that, but the fact is, when you run something like Invitation to Dinner, you don't get that experience of running up to Strahd's castle, and it's such a shame that you never see this big castle and this grand wilderness that they've created. And certainly you can run around in it, obviously, you could do explorers and stuff, but there's a lack of compelling reasons to do that. And I think we can have a point in the wilderness area to where it works like Isle of Dread, to where we don't have long rounds of quests, but at the same time you kind of get to absorb some of that ambiance, and you get the experience of kind of running around and running into these quests and seeing the scenery, and it really adds something to the charm of these expansions, in my opinion. So Wilderness, honestly, just keep doing what you've been doing, devs. I think the Isle of Dread Wilderness is pretty much perfect. I want to see the purple named rare type design return, where we have these more challenging aspects of the wilderness area, because a lot of times the wilderness area is just a pushover. So I would love to see that return, these purple, more challenging mobs that give you this kind of unique loot. And I think the design of adding wilderness only loot like we see in Isle of Dread is really cool. And I don't know necessarily want a Dynabone crafting system, which we'll get into in a bit here, but I like the idea of having stuff that's exclusive to the wilderness chest, whether that's loot or at least stuff that's super valuable in the chest, like how in the purple name rares you get a guaranteed blank whenever you kill the purple name rares in Isle of Dread. I love that kind of design that really emphasizes the wilderness area. So yeah, pretty much perfect. I would love to see them just follow the template they had in Isle of Dread. I mean, I would love to see, for example, the more engaging rares that you see in something like King's Force, where you actually get a mission as opposed to all the rares just being a mob to kill, like a mini boss to kill. But I would be fine with just what they did in Isle of Dread. That's more of a icing on top of the cake rather than the cake itself, I guess. So loot. Let's talk about loot. They've been doing a great job with loot mostly. I mean, they add a lot of creative decisions, and I think with Vecna's loot, they did a really good job with the power level of that loot. Was it super compelling? Yes. Did it overpower Isle of Dread loot? Not at all. Was it super compelling? Yes. But it was like a really about as good as you could get when it comes to a horizontal progression of loot rather than vertical. Obviously, with Myth Drannor, we're going to see a vertical because the quest level is the level cap's going up by 2. So we're going to see more powerful loot in Myth Drannor. So we're going to see some power creep. So that's fine. I think that is important. But again, I kind of go back to what I worry about it kind of outdating raid loot, some of the relevant raid loot. One thing I don't want to see is Dynabone crafting part 2, just because I don't want Dynabone crafting and the Dynabone weapons and things to only be useful for 2 levels whenever we get, say, a legendary reincarnation, which obviously is coming at some point in the future. We're going to be running from 30 to level 40. This is obvious that's going to happen at some point, even though it hasn't been formally announced. So I don't want to see the Isle of Dread loot only be usable for, say, like 2 levels in the future. So, and I don't want to see a repetition of what we already got in Isle of Dread, where they just give us blanks for every single weapon type. That's great in terms of giving every single build, even a weird build like I run Maul builds, a weapon to craft. And it's great in that aspect, but I would rather them go in a different direction and actually do more fully crafted, uniquely crafted weapons and loot going forward. So some light crafting, such as the Vecna loot, I think is fine, but I don't think I'm ready for another super grindy crafting system like we saw in Isle of Dread. I would also, a couple things I would love to see. I hope that they lighten up a bit on the loot Tetris. At this point in DDO's life, I think a lot of us are kind of fed up a bit with the Tetris. It's so insane these days that them adding more, and I think it seems like there's from a design perspective from SSG, this idea of that they want to keep adding more and more and more and more and more choices and different things. And I actually want to see them go away from that, because I think at this point, it's the more choices and the more differences, they aren't really adding more interest to the loot. It's just causing more headaches. So I want to see them take a step back, because honestly, the loot Tetris in DDO is insane right now, and I would love to see them take a step back and make it maybe more simple, maybe make certain effects that are more static in only certain gear slots going forward, to make it so it's easier to build a super valuable gear set. But honestly, the loot Tetris has gotten so exhausting. So I would like to see some, not simple, but not as crazy loot Tetris intensive gear sets with Myth Drannor and going forward. And I want to see more augments. I mean, they wouldn't even have to change the gear too much if they just added more augments. Like, I would love to see a true seeing augment, freedom movement augment to get some of these essential effects easily slottable. I would love to see more insightful augments that are scaled up more to current levels. I'd love to see like quality stat, just a lot of these harder to find effects I would like to see in augment form going forward. So hopefully there's some cool new augments with Myth Drannor that we haven't seen before. So the next thing I want to get into is secrets. So we had secrets in the last 2 expansions with Isle of Dread and Vecna Unleashed, and I strongly suspect we'll get more with Myth Drannor. Something hidden we need to discover. And the devs, I think this is really cool. I'll say, first of all, I think they did a great job, particularly in Isle of Dread, with these secrets. And it's a great way to bring the community together. However, and so applaud them for that, and I hope there's secrets and hidden stuff for us to discover. But I hope the devs also keep in mind, and I don't think they have kept in mind, how these mechanics are going to play after the secrets have been fully uncovered by the community. It seems like a lot of times, well, with these past two, with the steps secrets in Vecna Unleashed and the hidden dialogue throughout the quest that you plug into in the Skeletons in the Closet raid, it seems like these things have not been made with a lot of forethought with how the game's going to function in this capacity once those secrets are found out. So, for example, you still have to go and talk to Steps on 14 different days to get the goggles just so you can craft. Like, why is that a thing? I think once the community has found this stuff out, maybe make it so you don't have to talk to Steps so many times. Maybe just take that out so you can just get the goggles from her once the secret is discovered. Because after the secret's discovered, right, it just becomes a kind of a drudgery. And I think with Skeletons in the Closet, it was sort of similar in that you have 31 different sets of dialogue that you have to find in the Isle of Dread expansion. That was so cool, in that you need to figure them out and plug them into the raid and all that. That's awesome. But when we talk about raids and repetitive play of content, as DDO is a game where you play the content over and over and over and over, that mechanic in particular got really, really old. I hate doing the optional in Skeletons in the Closet because I hate copy and pasting things 31 times. And yes, I know there's a way to kind of manipulate the game code to plug that in so you can take some of that drudgery away, but we shouldn't have to do that. And it should instead be kind of programmed in a more interesting way. So once we found out the 31 dialogue options, why was the raid not patched to make those dialogue options easier to input? So we could at least put in maybe 4 total inputs, 1 in each corner or something, where you could plug that in at the same time, something like that. Love to see them have a patch prepared for after the secret, whatever it is, to make it more, make the gameplay more like reasonable and less of a drudgery going forward, as they certainly haven't done that with the last 2 expansions. So that I want to see that. That's kind of my thoughts regarding the secrets and whatever. I'm sure we'll have something here. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is tone. So DDO over the past, I don't know, year or two, it's gotten pretty silly, and I want to see them tone down the silliness a bit. Like, I'm all for the occasional lighthearted pack or quest. The Delirium series of quests are great. You have drinking kobolds, hilarious, funny, love it. Kobold challenges, the kobold sentient gem, that stuff's funny, and that's great. It's funny, and I think there is a huge section, well, not huge, but there's certainly a very valuable section of the game where we have content that's kind of a comedic relief. But as of late, SSG has been overdoing it quite a lot. So I hope Myth-Drannor, and it should be, being a classic module in pen and paper, it should be a return to serious D&D. And I hope they maybe for the foreseeable future, at least for the next couple of years, they stop with the comedic stuff, because it's getting to be a little much. Let's get super nerdy again about D&D. I mean, there's a lot of players who take this serious, and I hope we see more serious, super nerdy storylines going forward, just because lately it's been a lot of silly content. So we got, first it was Catastrophe Quest, where you're like a dragon that turns into a cat, and then we had fairly silly side quests in Vecna Unleashed, and then we had extremely silly Slice of Life pack, and then we got the silly looking new Chunky Dragon Mount, and apparently, I haven't played it, I haven't encountered this because I only tested it on Lamani, but apparently the Wild Mage archetype has a Wild Magic Surge where you actually fart. I'm not kidding, this is actually a thing apparently. And I don't dislike any of this on its own. I like comedy, but it needs to be done sparingly, and it's been way overused as of the past couple years. So it's time to retire it for a while. So I would love to see them return to serious fantasy storylines and content for at least a little while. It is a D&D RPG, and it can become immersion breaking for a section of the community if they overdo the silliness, and they have. So, and it can also, and I've seen comments from players on this regard, it can put off whether true or not true, it can put off the impression that the devs aren't taking the game seriously, and they aren't taking D&D seriously if used too much. So I want to see more serious stuff. So guys, that's everything on my list here of things I want to see in Mythranor and going forward. Let me know in the comments, what do you want to see? Do you agree or disagree with anything I said in this video? Would be interested in reading that as always. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one. Take care.